This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. This morning we have both our Executive Director, Samuel Gunter, and our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz, with us. I will first turn it over to Samuel.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to have you on the call this morning. I want to talk for just a second about the webinars that we hosted yesterday and on Friday, and then I'll turn it over to Stephanie to walk you through all of the things that are happening right now in the news, because there is a lot to talk about. But first, I want to thank everyone who joined our webinars. We put together, really on Thursday afternoon, two emergency action webinars for Friday and Monday, and with less than 24 hours notice on the Friday one, we had over 140 people on there, and between the two, 350 folks representing 286 organizations across the state, from almost every county in North Carolina, to serving 176,000 families a year, responsible for more than $620 million in public funding, attended these webinars to figure out what we do in response to the risk that we are all at right now with critical housing investments that we rely on to make transformative impacts in our communities. We walked through a couple of items in the news, tried to connect some dots for folks. I'm not going to rehash all of that here right now, but for the folks that attended the calls, it was local governments, it was healthcare providers, homeless service providers, there were Habitat affiliates, CDCs, universities, there were foundation partners, financial institutions, there were reporters on the call, women's and children's advocacy group, faith-based organizations. It was a wide swath of the universe of folks that do this work on the ground. Again, Stephanie is going to walk us through a little bit of the news, and we'll rehash some of the items that we talked about on these calls, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what the action points are for this universe of folks. One of the things that I told folks is, if you have known me and interacted with me over the last decade that I've been at the Housing Coalition, you know that I am not given to hyperbole, and I generally don't send out action alerts or ask you to call unless it is absolutely necessary, right? And so when I say that to say it is a 5-alarm fire right now. The resources that we rely on are absolutely at risk, and Stephanie will walk through some of the data points on that as we go through the call. But none of it right now, none of it is a done deal. And so the time for action is this week, both in terms of distributing existing and appropriated funds, making sure they go to the place they're supposed to go, ensuring that the administration is actually following court decisions around executive orders and so on, but also in the process of budget negotiations. So as we have to fund the government, because funding runs out on March 14th, which is right around the corner. So we have a couple of items. The first one was thank you to those of you who have signed on to the letter that we sent to Congress, asking them to ensure that the administration gets resources to where they're appropriated to go, and that they prioritize housing and community development investments in budget negotiations. We had more than 400 signatories of that, covering every county in North Carolina. We have sent the letter, but there is still time to sign on to that letter, because we will continue to talk about it. So that was point number one. But the actions for this week, what I asked everyone on the call to do, because again, this is probably the most perilous time in affordable housing work and community development work in my decade at the coalition and beyond, that when you get to the office in the morning, you've got 3 calls on your call sheet before you do anything else. You call Senator Budd, you call Senator Tillis, you reach out to your congressperson. I'll talk about messaging in just a second, but once you have done that, I want you to write down a list of the 3 to 5 top supporters of the work that your organization does. This could be staff, this could be board members, volunteers, donors, sister organizations that know the impact of the work that you do. I need you to call those 3 to 5 people and get them to do the thing that I just asked you to do, which is every day for the next week, first thing you do when you hit the office is call Senator Budd, call Senator Tillis, call your congressperson. They need to hear from us constantly, loudly, and in overwhelming numbers right now, because, again, none of this is a done deal, and we are fighting for these critical resources. Now is the time. We cannot wait. So, again, call Senator Budd, call Senator Tillis, reach out to your congressperson, then find those 3 to 5 folks that know the impact that your organization makes in the community and get them to do the same. Here are the 3 talking points that we want to push, and we'll have we will send these out. These will be in the call notes. We'll also be publishing them out as well. If you were on the calls, you should have these in your inbox already. But talking point number 1, the decision to hold up federal funds and eliminate federal staff will cost people their homes. Full stop. Make it simple, make it plain, say it with your full chest. Talking point number 2, the problem was never waste, fraud, and abuse. All of us that operate housing programs, we all have ideas after having managed them on the ground about how they could work better, how they could be designed a little bit better. There are things that all of us want to see improvements on and reform on, but the problem wasn't ever waste, fraud, and abuse. The problem was always not enough resources, right? You're not going to fix this problem by cutting off the critical resources that we rely on to make these transformative investments. So again, stopping the funds and eliminating staff will cost people their homes. The problem was not waste, fraud, and abuse. The problem was not enough resources. And then finally, you are the expert. You know your community and the problems that you are trying to tackle better than anyone else. When you are on these calls, I know a lot of folks often feel like when they talk to elected officials or their staff, they get nervous because they're not in the weeds on what bill is doing what and what committee and what's the process, and it feels sometimes opaque. Stand firm in the knowledge that you are the expert. You know the community better, you know the issue area better, and you are absolutely the best messenger. So talk about the scale of the impact on your organization if these resources are cut off, but do not forget to make that direct connection to the impact on people and communities that you serve in the districts that they represent. So again, cutting off these funds and cutting federal staff will cost people their homes. The problem wasn't waste, fraud, and abuse. The problem was not enough resources. And then talk about what that's going to mean for your community. Say it with passion, say it with clarity, say it with your full chest. And then after you do that, when you wake up the next day, call them again. Even if you get a hold of someone, call them again. They need to hear it often, they need to hear it loudly, and they need to hear it from a whole bunch of us, y'all. I'm going to stop talking there and let Stephanie walk through the news because there are a number of items that are of critical importance for you and the work that you do. But before Stephanie gets started, I just want to say how I closed off both of the webinars. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the expertise that you deploy, for the dedication that you show week in and week out, trying to make a difference in your communities around the state. It is important. Your communities are worth fighting for. The work that you do is worth fighting for. And right now is absolutely the time. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Samuel. Like Samuel mentioned, there's a lot of news to cover. So going to kind of continue down the federal path, there are a lot of changes that are threatening the work that we do. First up, the Department of Housing and Urban Development is being threatened by the DOGE task force. DOGE is the Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk and that department are proposing to terminate at least half of all HUD employees, which translates to about 4,300 staff. According to a letter that 25 Senate Democrats sent to the new HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, initial reports suggest that no program office would be spared and that staffing cuts would range from 10% to 84%. For a little bit of context, one of those departments that is at risk is the Office of Community Planning and Development, which oversees the $1.4 billion of community development block grant disaster recovery dollars that HUD allocated to North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. This department, the Office of Community Planning and Development within HUD, would be reduced from 936 employees to 150. Another key piece of federal news, last week, the Department of Housing and Urban Development notified several housing technical assistance providers that it intends to terminate technical assistance grants. And they cited the DEI content on websites and senior leadership LinkedIn profiles as the reason. Some of the folks that got these letters include Enterprise, Technical Assistance Cooperation, LISC, Corporation for Supportive Housing, and many others. This is in clear violation of the restraining orders, the injunctions that judges have placed on the freezing and halting and affection of federal funds, but a lot of folks have been getting these letters since last week. Additionally, Senate Democrats are demanding answers on the proposed housing cuts in the continuing resolution talks that are happening right now. Congress has until March 14th to pass a budget or pass another continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown. The House and Senate have both passed separate budget resolutions, but now they have to work through the reconciliation process to come to an agreement, and their budgets are quite different and include cuts that would, again, cause people to lose their homes. And also last week, HUD Secretary Scott Turner announced formally plans to end the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And he plans to replace it with a weekend interim rule that only asks housing providers to self-attest their commitment to fair housing. So in response, we've been leaning on our colleagues at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and following their work as they work closely with the fair housing advocates to fight for full implementation of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 to promote fair housing and inclusive communities. Moving on to state and local updates, because there are still things happening at the state level, so lots going on. We're watching a few different meetings this week, but the main topics that have been moving pretty quickly have still been in the realm of disaster recovery. So there are several bills that deal with Hurricane Helene, the main one being House Bill 47 that passed the House. And there are various appropriation committee meetings this week that are continuing to kind of iron out and talk through some of those allocations and appropriation components of that bill and funding for recovery. Just a bit of an overview of HB 47. It passed in the House last Tuesday and it's now in the Senate. The Senate does have a sort of shell version of that bill, but there also have been other bills that have been kind of stepping out and providing additional, or proposing the addition of other resources and funds. It still falls short of Governor Josh Stein's request to the General Assembly last month for an additional $1.07 billion to meet the immediate needs in Western North Carolina, but here's a little bit about what it does. It directs the transfer of $275 million from the State Emergency Response and Disaster Relief Fund to the Helene Fund. And so this brings the total amount in the Helene Fund to $500 million. The legislation that they passed in December left about $225 million unallocated. So that plus this $275 million is what amounts to this $500 million. The bill then continues to appropriate the $500 million in several different ways. One of significant note is that there's $10 million being allocated to supplement rental assistance payments, going to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to go to County Department of Social Services to help with rental assistance. There's also a $15 million allocation proposed for Golden Lease to help with small business revitalization and to create a grant program. This bill also amends another bill to make over $100 million in loans to local governments forgivable. There are other bills that have been filed around this. There has also been an additional bill filed, HB 222, titled the Cooper Act, which proposes the allocation of the $217 million needed for NCORE to complete recovery in Eastern North Carolina. So that is being discussed today in the House Judiciary Committee at 1 p.m. And like I mentioned, there are several other meetings. Thursday, there's a Joint Legislative Commission on Governmental Operations, Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery at 9 a.m. So we will be there. We'll be listening in and have a presence there to kind of follow the conversation and what's happening, both with sort of the wrap-up of recovery in the East and the continued efforts to really bolster recovery in the West. Last week, RUSH funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development was announced for North Carolina. So HUD announced an additional $1.9 million on an allocation for North Carolina for the RUSH program, which stands for Rapid Unsheltered Survivor Housing. RUSH assists households experiencing or at risk of homelessness in the wake of disasters. An initial allocation of $3 million was deployed in October to meet immediate needs, and the second round is intended to address the need for rental units for very low-income households and any additional unmet needs that this population faces that aren't met by other programs. I could not emphasize enough everything that Samuel mentioned in the first part of this call. These announcements for additional funding being approved, all of the decisions, all of the letters, the termination of contracts, the firing of staff, all of these decisions and these events impact this funding. It impacts when and how the money gets here, if it even gets to the communities that need them, if it even gets to the households that need them, if the projects can even reach completion. So many things about our work are really foundational. The foundation is federal funding, and the rest of it is filled by other sources. So just want to reemphasize that. We have several events and different resources for you to check out in the remainder of the call notes. But one thing that I want to make sure that we lift up and that we remind you all is that we will be having a housing day at the legislature this April 9th. We're partnering with Habitat for Humanity of North Carolina, the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. And on Wednesday, April 9th, we'll be having Housing Day at the North Carolina General Assembly. Registration is free. We'll have that link in the call notes for you. We will also be having a dinner that is separate the day before for housing champions to have a chance to come together and to network. There is a cost to that, and there's a separate link to that, but we have a link both to the page with more details about the event itself, as well as to registration in the call notes for you. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into the webinars yesterday and Friday. Please continue to keep us in the loop and make sure you are calling your senators and calling your congresspeople in order to make it very, very clear how all of these decisions and events recently are going to really put our work in jeopardy and people's lives. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time.